Today's topic is something that, it's always interesting when you're on the board of directors and there's things that you get presented to you, and then there's a lot of other things happening in the company. And how do you be cognizant and doing your governance and oversight to keep tabs on various activities? So what Pam is here today to talk to us about is when something goes wrong. And it's really great for us as directors to hear this story, and especially the learnings from a board of director, how they maneuvered it. Sometimes you have a situation that happens out of just something happens where it was a general mistake. Sometimes you have things happen where there's bad actors. They take on totally different meaning. And the fact that Pam is willing to share with us the story of what happened, how the board managed it, what happened afterwards, and then what I think is some of the best information for us is kind of key learning as a director, what she does differently as a director, having gone through this pretty incredible experience. So I'm going to kick it off with Pam give the group a little bit about your background and start with giving us an overview of what happened with this scenario that we're gonna discuss today.
Sure. After starting my career with Monsanto, I started 3 companies in Davis, California. The one that we're talking about, where this bad thing happened, is Marone Bioinnovations. Started that in 2006, and then went public in 2013. All 3 companies dedicated to increasing the sustainability of agriculture through developing natural products that are safer for the environment and people on the planet. And so that's my life's mission. And as a person who is trying to save the planet and doing good at the same time, you never really think that you're going to encounter some of the things that you encounter. And so that's what we're here today to talk about. So welcome, everybody.
Thanks, Pam. So, as I was reflecting on what happened here and having you get started on this, I thought about, there's been a few situations, quite a while ago in my career where something went awry, and it typically started with an instinct that something's just not right, whether you're in the company or you're hearing something as a board of directors. So, give us an overview of what happened at Marone Bio.
Yes. So in 2013, we took the company public, and then 2014, in August, our head of sales, he was the chief commercial officer, and I had recently promoted him to chief operating officer, which created complications because he was a corporate officer. And so after he resigned, we're like, well, it was personal reasons there, we were like, what's going on? So we sent out one of the other commercial people to talk to customers in order to keep the business going. And a customer made us aware of a side deal that our chief commercial officer and his people had done with them. And that gave the customer the right to return $2 million worth of product. So it's called inventory protection. So this was very bad because we don't offer inventory protection. And if you offer the customer the right to return, then the sale is not actually final, and you would have to defer that revenue and not recognize that revenue. So our general counsel, Linda Moore, who is I see is on the call, and Jim Boyd, I hope he's also our CFO, just joined the company like March timeframe of that year. 6 months later, they're faced with, along with me, what you're going to do when you find this information out from your customer. So I really feel for them because they were rock solid through this whole thing as well. So having those 2 in the team with me, we couldn't have gotten through it. So we then, of course, realized that we went, holy, so we then had to go tell our board and our audit committee. We made them aware of this undeclared side deal with customers. And so that then triggered the audit committee had to then start an investigation, by law. So hired the accounting firm and hired an outside legal firm to start the investigation. At the time, Ernst & Young was our auditors. And so what happened was that the customer, the customer who took the inventory protection deal did not tell their finance or audit department about it. And ours did not tell our audit, or didn't declare to our audit or to any of us as well. So in that situation, it was quite hidden. And so nobody knew about it. That then triggered this investigation, and they found some more instances of email inventory protection offered to customers. However, none of the other customers took the inventory protection. They said, no, we actually want the product. We're not taking these take back rights. So only that 2 million we ended up having to return. They returned the product to us. All the rest of it was about $6 million. Small dollars here, but big for the company. $6 million had to be restated, and it took more than 18 months of restatement. It dragged out until we were going to be delisted because we hadn't restated, and it cost us $17 million in legal and accounting fees, and an SEC fine of $2.5 million. And at the end of the day, they said it was a rogue employee, our head of sales. It also became chief operating officer, and he was arrested, charged with many counts of fraud, and pled guilty to fraud. So that's what happened.
So the board. So you were the CEO at the time, right?
Yep. And on the board,
the chair on the board. So tell us a little bit about the dynamics of your discovery and how the board got involved, and just I'm curious of how that worked, as well as the resolution and kind of how that played out from a board role versus a C-suite role.
Yeah. So the board audit committee went to work right away. They knew what they had to do. And so, started led the investigation and hired the outside accounting and outside legal. The rest of the board, I would have to say, was pretty chaotic, and sort of ensued a Lord of the Flies, Game of Thrones kind of era of the company, because no one had encountered this before on the board, and didn't really know how to truly handle it. And so there's a lot of blame going around, and whose fault was it? Was I involved? And remember, until the SEC said I was not involved, and that it was this rogue employee, then you as CEO are sitting there weakened, because what did you do to enable this situation? And of course, that all came out in the SEC testimony and all the investigation and all the different terabytes of data that was subpoenaed to find out about this situation. So it was quite chaotic, and it's a lesson here that if you're a board member, you don't really know what you don't know. You don't know what you don't know. Okay, so I've had investors in the past say, say plan for black swan events, and then, oh, what could happen? Then I was taking my previous company, AgriQuest, public right before 9/11. Oh, okay, now you know what could happen: a terrorist attack. Then you have, the 2008 meltdown, and just fortunately had raised money right before that, got the money in the door, and then now we have COVID. So you as boards, you don't really. It's really hard to plan for disaster, but this one we learned you actually can plan for. So as part of the settlement with the SEC, I was required to take a number of courses, and one was I had to take several hours of training with the head of fraud for Pricewaterhouse. And what she said was, well, okay, if it's any consolation, you probably wouldn't have caught it because everybody missed it, because I wrote the book. I wrote the controls book, and the controls are not designed to catch lying, okay, and hiding and collusion with customers, okay. So then, so then how do you catch something like this, okay? Well, then the other courses I took address that. And one was at Santa Clara University, and we'll put this in resources, a fantastic class from the Markula Center for Applied Ethics. And they had an instructor about, oh, and also Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics, both had really good training in this. And it comes down to corporate culture. And what happened in the company was that corporate culture drifted. So there's actually whole classes in corporate culture drift, which professors teach this. So you have a very influential employee. This guy was incredibly charismatic, could convince anybody, sell ice to Eskimos. Investors loved him. Okay, was on the road show, and they'd call him directly. But he developed a culture within a culture that drifted the culture into something that we didn't want. And you can see it I've seen it with heads of R&D, chief scientists. It can be anybody in the company that gets a following. And so you as the CEO and board have to be really aware of this going on within a company, but you're off raising money, you're off doing this, boards are busy, and you don't pay attention to this. And so what I've learned as CEO and what we learned as the board is that boards and the CEO must pay a lot more attention to culture and monitor that on a regular basis, because you can put all the controls you want in the world and sign documents and have your sales team and everybody reporting and signing things, but what if they lie? So therefore, it really does come down to that corporate culture.
Is that something I'm so curious about this, because we talk about culture a lot. There's been a lot of events about culture, a lot of diversity, inclusion, that type of subject. But this one is really interesting, and I've seen it in, I was with a very large organization I manage in HP, and there's subcultures. Well, obviously when they're global, but there's subcultures of behaviors and attitudes, and it's really hard as the person at the top to understand that. I used to do coffee chats and try to we have this thing, managing by wandering around, if you guys have heard of this. But it's still really hard. So you mentioned that you have to keep an eye on it. What does that look like? What does keeping an eye on it look like?
Yeah, that's a really good question, because once you go through this and then you want to prevent it from happening again, I was much more astute and aware, ears to the ground, on what was happening across the organization. Now we had a small company, so you can imagine a big company how this happened. In fact, Monsanto had a very similar investigation and restatement, and they got an $80 million fine with the SEC at about the same time. But for a big company, it doesn't have the effect that it did on a small little company like this, which was devastating for us. So I'll give you an example. There was a group of R&D people who were insisting that they should be working on a different project than the one that management had designated working on. And this was after this and after the restatement. And it was creating a separate wing or culture within the R&D. And no matter how hard I tried, you said, this is the project we're going to work on. This is the reason, and use all the logic in the world, of showing them the market research and everything. But this particular scientist, who was very influential, loved to cook, and the employees loved him, so he'd bring in his cookings, and so he was very beloved. I finally had to say, to his boss, head of R&D, this person either has to change or go. Okay. So, that kind of ultimatum had to happen. And this is the first time in my entire career where the person actually changed. So a lot of CEOs now who talk to me say, okay, I've had this situation in my company, and what do you think? Do you think this person, be it a CFO or head of research or whatever, is going to make it? And I said, no. So the majority of the time, the person has a different agenda and is not going to make it and won't change. So the best thing to do is to exit them out of the organization, harsh as it may be, but that's the only way really to keep the culture in the where you want it. The other thing we did was we had the entire company, all the employees, go through a vision, mission, and culture exercise, mission, vision, and values exercise on a regular basis. So after the investigation and restatement, we call the whole event an H-bomb. The whole company got together and redid the statements and came up with value statements, and then put them, laminated them, and hiring new people, which completely changed how we hired new people. So before, you would hire mostly for skills. Culture was not, or fit to the culture was not the biggest factor. It switched. And so the scientists or sales or whatever would interview the person before I got to them and said, Pam, don't even bother. Great resume, wonderful skills, not going to fit the culture. And so, that was really critical. And the types of questions we asked prospective employees completely changed to try to get at someone's value system and their integrity. And what a lesson there.
Yeah, that's really important. I've seen that also in my career, especially in the technical areas where you revere these people with these technical skills. I'm sure for you, it was the scientific skills. And people they make exceptions for them, but it really tears the morale and as you describe it, the culture of the whole organization. So, and the longer you take before you fix that, the more destruction that occurs. And in the case that you're describing, having someone that insulated a culture so that you didn't know what was happening is kind of one of the ultimate damages about it. What about culture in the boardroom? We're going to talk more about the board, but I'm curious about how you've related this to the board in terms of who you bring on, how you bring them on. Obviously, you want the board to mimic the culture of the company as well.
Yeah, the board did go through quite a bit of change, and some of the deck chairs changed in that. And again, just like hiring employees, it's not easy, because you're going to hire for specific, experience. Does this person, have experience on, you have your grid of what you want on your board, and culture is usually not on that grid. Now, of course, diversity and inclusion was always a value. I hear criticism of you shouldn't be hiring for culture because that shrinks, that doesn't address diversity and inclusion. I don't agree with that, because diversity and inclusion, if that's a core value, then of course that should be a core of the company. That should be a core value of your board as well. And so I don't think I've fully perfected it yet. And I think it is the hardest thing to do. And that is developing the culture in the company that mirrors the culture of the board. So I think all, boards, and NACD is working hard on the curriculum because I went to one of the big summits, on this, and it was very interesting about how that conversation is still happening in most boards. So yes, it's about the people you hire, but also most boards don't have training in a lot of this. And so stepping up the education and training and learnings and how you can sync the company's culture with the board culture.
Yeah, that's so important. So when it started to unfold, and you were saying, the board was trying to get a handle on it, what were some of the things that the board did to manage through this? Did they create a special committee? Did they do it as a whole team? Did they let the governance? I mean, how did it? I'm curious how it unfolded, and then maybe also what you might do differently. We'll kind of address that later, but I'm curious how you managed it.
So the audit committee was off doing its restatement thing and dealing with lawyers and accountants, and the rest of the board did set up a separate committee, and they were addressing some of the issues that I would say there were things that created doubt about what could have led to this, and so they set up a special committee that was not financially related about some of the things going on in the company. And it was very painful for me because I was not allowed to participate in any of the conversations. So I was sort of sidelined. Mm-hmm. And I'd have to say that the lesson here is that I took it very personally. My name is in the name, Marone Bioinnovations. And so I took it very, very personally. And am I being blamed? Am I being attacked? And so Jim Boyd, who's the now retired CFO of Marone Bio, basically said, you're going to get through this with the board. Stop taking it personally. Everybody is trying to find their way through this. Some people look at it differently, and everybody has maybe have a different way of getting through it. But stop taking it personally. And that was the trigger. And I actually hired an executive coach, and so they helped me work on that. So how was I going to bridge, and the kind of language I was going to use with the board in terms of all getting on the same page. And so once I, dialed down the emotion and taking it personally, was able to just look rationally and say, okay, everybody is trying to do the same thing here, and let's get through it. But the board did have some come to Jesus meetings apart from management about how they were going to get through it, and basically either you trust your management or you don't. Either you fire your management or you keep them. And so a decision was made on who's best to run, and basically stop the questioning and blame, and then handing the keys back to existing management, fully aligned with the board, really was the key to getting through.
That's great. I have one more area that I want to do this part of the conversation, and then we're going to jump into all these really great questions. And that is, you're on several other boards, obviously,
Yep.
and you're still on the Marone Bio board.
Yep.
What do you do differently as a director now, having gone through this? For many board of directors or directors may not have experienced this yet, hopefully never will. But what can you help us understand that you do differently as a director? And I'm curious about, do you have different expectations of the subcommittees of the company? You almost, not you, but just in general, it creates a sense of paranoia when you think there's something. So what do you do differently now as a director?
Yeah, I do serve on a number of boards, and both nonprofit and for-profit, and one of the things that is really important is to have a trusting coaching relationship with management. And the better that is, the more likely management is going to go to the board with some issues and really work through them. And the transparency that you can get from management and bringing the issues, and just being open and honest and candid, and creating that culture. And again, aligning the culture of the company, sitting down together and saying, what kind of culture do we both want to have, and carefully selecting the people. I think and how you hire, I think those are a lot of the things we've done differently, and certainly stepping up the training. Yeah.
I think it's always interesting. I've heard in some of the sessions we've had here, that directors should feel comfortable reaching out to various people in the organization. And I think that's, you have to be careful with duty of care and all of these other, respect for the management team. I think having directors go out and just contact people could be a bit difficult, and in some cases not really appropriate for just business respect and whatnot. What do you think about that in terms of this scenario? Do you think if a director had been maybe networking or something, it's really impossible to do that, but where would you say that this may or may not help the situation?
In this case, it wouldn't have really helped much. Yeah. But what really depends on the board, because I've seen it really work where board members can contact anybody on the management team, and I've seen other situations where it's more of a gotcha. It's kind of like, I'm looking for dirt, and so it's got to be the right culture to be able to do that. Yeah.
I think it needs to be managed
appropriately.
One scenario I heard was that one of the boards where they assigned directors to be kind of a mentor to various C-suite people, so it was well known what was going to happen and how it was going to happen and what the rules were, and I thought that could work. But
one of the things we also did was, I'll just mention, one of the things we also did was we invited board members to our C-suite weekly team meeting. And so they could get a look further into, what was going on in the organization. And wow, they said, wow, that's great. They learned a lot. So we did a rotation of that, and that worked out really well. And of course, we have lots of dinners and board meetings with the full team, and so they could get to know, and that's really helpful as well.
That's good. Yeah. What about did you see after you went through this that you created different structure on the board, or was the structure pretty much the same? Did it have you change some dynamics of how you did your agenda or anything like that, or?
No, not really. The being a public company, we had a pretty routine way of doing the agendas and the committees and so forth. Not really. So that part. So the mechanistic part of it, certainly compliance. It was always compliance of a public company is just always a big deal, and so remains so. So it's the softer stuff that you forget about, as I said, the culture and the things that are not so measurable as financial metrics and audit committee stuff.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, it's just so interesting. It sounds like so much learning that I think can help in the future. But, when we were doing our talk about this beforehand and then hearing it again about the culture, I do think we underestimate the culture's influence on and the subcultures that get created in a company, and that it needs to be managed, not just let kind of happen. So there's a question here from Evelyn, and I can let Evelyn ask the question if you'd like to regarding why don't you go ahead and ask the culture question, Evelyn?
Sure. So I chair audit committees, and I will ask internal audit to go out and audit the culture. And they look at me quizzically because they're not quite sure how to go about doing that. Based on your experience, are there questions that you would have your internal audit ask to find out whether those subcultures exist, and then be able to report back to you?
Well, it's interestingly, because I did try to address this mechanistically, and so would do a anonymous employee poll, which would not be run by me, but by somebody else, where the values of the company were rated by every quarter, and then became every month, then became every quarter as it become a public company. Okay, what values on this list do you see us drifting from and not performing well on? What values do you think we're doing really well on? And wow, that was fantastic, because that feedback directly from the employees back up was so valuable. The one that really I laughed at was when we were really doing bad on the value of having fun. So what we do? So we said, okay, we instituted an employee committee who was going to find ways to have more fun and institutionalize that. But that's well, maybe after what we went through, we sure needed to address that fun. But there were other ones that that popped up, and were we customer focused enough was one of the values, and was our safety committee doing the right things? And so it really flushed out a lot of stuff.
That's great. That's great. Okay, so Cora has a question around sales erosion and the impact.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. And first, I can't tell Pam how meaningful this is, and to get your experience from somebody who lived through this. And you mentioned the 17 million, but you must have quantified the additional fallout in sales, customer and employee retention.
Yep.
And I almost hate to add insult to injury to have you talk about it, but you've come this far, so.
Okay, I will tell you.
Thank you.
No secrets here. So we laid off 40% of our employees. Fortunately, our largest shareholder at the time lent us 40 million because we couldn't raise money because we were in the penalty box. So, which he later converted to equity. So we were survived by a fantastic investor we had. But downsized by 40%. And then our largest competitor, who bought my old company, AgriQuest, is just right down the road in West Sacramento, poached 30% of our R&D employees. So it was very painful. We lost sales for 2 years. We still continued to grow remarkably. Our sales growth was 50+%, and it went down to 10-15%, but we actually still grew, testament to our products. But we were in the penalty box with our customers. The big customers, they're big distributors who sell to farmers. Some of them, well, actually only one of them dropped us. All the rest of our large customers kept buying from us. So I think that worked out well. But you know what, at the end of the day, the loss of the employees that left, so the ones that stayed, most of them are still with the company. Why did they stay? Because they believed in the vision of changing agriculture to be more sustainable. That mission and vision has kept them going. And they became very, very active in shaping the culture of the company. And because they had so much input into what the culture is and is today, they stayed because they feel so valued, not just a drone or having no say.
Right. All right, Debbie Alvarez Rodriguez has a question about what if the CEO is insulating the culture?
I have had this go on three over the last 30 years. I've had 3 nonprofit boards where this was a problem. Mm-hmm. And 2 of the 3, we had to change the CEO. And so it's really tough if you're the CEO and you're sitting there in front of the SEC and they have a whole day of trying to find out whether you were the one creating that toxic culture. Oh my God. Wow, that was really awful. But I have to tell you this story because it is so darn funny. So on that day when the SEC in San Francisco was grilling me, they were looking for examples from employees, and they had subpoenaed employees, of an example of my creating a toxic culture. So they said, Dr. Marone, did you yell at an employee for not recycling their plastic fork? And I said, I said with a straight face, you're darn right I did. And then I said, you do realize this is like a company joke. It's like lore within the company that Pam's a recycling Nazi. We're a sustainable company. I mean, sustainability is one of our core values. And, people in the lunchroom would be putting their fork over the garbage. And I'd go, no. And honest to God, there were a couple of other minor examples, but that's what they pulled out. And it was, I have to laugh at it today. I mean, at the time, I didn't feel so nice, but that's pretty funny.
That's pretty funny. Let's see, what else do we have here? Here we go. Jane Lee. Hi, Jane. Oh, it's good to see you. Why don't you go ahead and ask your question?
Hey, Pam, thanks for sharing with us. Great discussion. So I had an opportunity for one of the board to participate on the team. We had a regional issue with some sales leaders, and then it become much bigger. We found there's a systematic practice and the distiller were involved, etc. But so we did conclude that there's a regional cultural issue. By the end of the day, the leadership had some responsibility as well to let that, going on for a couple of years. I'm curious in this specific case, that's just the background to explain why I'm interested for you to share more color on this. In this case, how did you and the board conclude you need to work on the culture? It's not just the one bad egg. What are some of the details, if that's okay to share? And I'm still also very curious how a promise at the scale could escape the contract review process on both sides.
Yes. So because the customer did not make their finance department aware of the side deal and ours didn't, it didn't come up in the audit because there was this side deal that was sitting in a drawer somewhere. And all the cultural issue was that the sales team was tightly knit around like an impenetrable block around this charismatic chief commercial officer. So nobody talked, and nobody brought it to the attention of the customer's financial department either. So in that case, when you have both sides, the Price Waterhouse fraud lady said, it would be really hard to detect. We also had all of our salespeople had to sign papers that they didn't do side deals and everything. So when people lie, that's a tough one. So that's why we concluded that yes, you beef up your controls, you do everything you can. You add more people to your quarterly disclosure meetings and so forth. But at the end of the day, it really is about that cultural drift. And people were scared to tell us in higher management what was going on. Some people knew what was going on because they were afraid of getting fired. He was very charismatic, but at the same time ruthless, in that if you didn't toe the line, you would get fired by him. And so, people were afraid of their jobs. So in that sense, we then beefed up the what do we call it? Suggestion boxes, both online and in person, and in real in the lunchroom. We always had the whistleblower reporting, but just constantly, our legal counsel, she's on this call, Linda Moore, would remind employees at every employee meeting, you have this means to, if you see something going on. So making it that it's not threatening if you report something, you see something, that's going on. And fortunately, we haven't had anything like that ever again. So, yeah.
Yeah. Every company, especially public companies, it's by law, you have to have a whistleblower line, but if nobody knows about it and knows the number, to me, that's negligent. So it's good to have that open culture. And I see that Greg Matz has his hand up. So Greg, if you'd like to ask your question.
Get on mute here. Yeah, Pam, thank you.
There you are.
I had a quick question. A lot of companies I've worked for have put a lot of effort into management representation letters where it cascades down through the C-suite, through the sales organization, at least to sales management. And that gives people an opportunity to list out things that are inappropriate, like side letters. I was curious if you all had that kind of a tool, or if you did, would you find it effective, or this person would have just lied and signed the letter anyway?
No, we had prohibitions against side letters and things. And we beefed it up, but we had all those in place. Everybody knew you were not supposed to offer inventory protection. It was like, no, because everybody knew then you couldn't recognize the revenue. You just don't do that in this industry. Maybe the big companies can offer inventory protection, but we don't. So yeah, beefing up the checklist. So for example, their common practice in our industry is giving gift cards to a salesman giving a gift card to a salesman of a customer, and those little might seem too small. It's very common in our industry, but you can't do that. Okay, so little things like that. Everything was now pretty well. The checklist was beefed up, I would say. Yeah.
Let's see, we have.
There's a question here, about microcultures within an organization are actually very common. Yes, that's what we learned. And in fact, can lead to leakage in values. At the end of the day, isn't the CEO accountable for ensuring this doesn't happen? You betcha. That's what we learned.
The buck stops there, right?
That's what we learned. Yeah.
What about, what has this perspective given you on when you join a board? Do you ask different questions than you might have asked before, or look at different? I always tell people when they ask me when they're thinking about joining a board, make sure you review the bylaws and the D&O insurance. Those are kind of, the bylaws tell you where the power lies, and helps you understand the company better. And the D&O insurance helps you understand how well you're covered for very good reasons. Is there different things you ask about culture, or something that would give you an idea that board values, the things that you now know from this experience that you would ask different?
You know, what's interesting is I was asking somebody recently, what are you looking for in a board member? And the first thing they said was culture, address the culture. This is the culture we have. This is the culture we want to maintain. And that has the first time that's ever happened. So it's not usually top of mind when you're talking to board members. You're right. They'll tell you, you know, oh, we're looking for this skill set, you know, and so, and they get, you know, they tell you how much do you know they have exactly. And often they're looking for the audit committee. Usually it's the, you know, they're looking for the audit committee, future audit committee chair or audit committee members, because those are hard to find. And so I really appreciated that. So I would rather not ask them about the culture, because I'll ask about it later if they don't bring it up, but it's great to see if they'll bring it up.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah.
So Kate, why don't you ask your question, or somebody else?
Oh, I certainly can. Hello. First of all, thank you for this session, Pam. It's fantastic. And thank you, Kim, for making it happen. My question was just, are there things you've learned or others have learned around targets and incentives and how those influence or impact culture, and especially with, you know, what happened at Wells Fargo and things that we can learn, especially when we're very metrics driven too. In many, I'm thinking my company and boards I'm involved in, that you want to be very analytical and metrics driven, but what can be the downside of that?
You brought up a very important question, and that is, yes, how you measure in the metrics of your sales team, and the compensation for that was critical here, because I basically was told the mistake that we made was that tying the sales numbers to getting a promotion, and what was misaligned. Now it's very common. Everybody does. A lot of people do that, but they said you shouldn't do that. And then because that could lead to the misalignment. And then secondly, the pressure to succeed on the numbers can be so intense that it's that the sales team, now in this case, you know, they said that wasn't the case, but the pressure to succeed is so high that you know, the sales team will do bad things because they're feeling like the only way they can succeed is doing bad things. And so when I took my training with the head of Price Waterhouse, she gave so many great examples of this situation where there was a manufacturing plant in the Midwest, and the corporation was going to close down the manufacturing plant. So the CFO changed the numbers on the plant to save 300 jobs. His intentions were good, but you know, he just didn't want to have to lay off those people. And there was another one where the corporate headquarters unintended consequences said, you're doing deals with China, your legal documents have to be exactly the way they are papered in the US. Well, it was nearly impossible to put a legal document together just like the US lawyers wanted it. So the sales team in China had a second set of contracts that were different from the ones in the US. So I mean, there were stories after stories. She told us 1,000 cases of fraud in the Bay Area alone in that time frame where the go-go IPO. You're going to see probably another wave of that, because since we have a go-go IPO and SPAC time right now too. So it never ends, you know. It's human nature is what she said about these things that happen.
Be careful what you measure.
Exactly. Be careful.
Most
what
likely
you measure.
get done. You have to have compensating measures to make sure that you are measuring the soft side, the hard side, and everything to get the outcome that you're looking for.
Yeah.
That's really important. Christine, did you have a question?
Okay, I hit the unmute.
There
Just
we
took
go.
me a minute. I would just say, and this is more when I was in a company setting and the board, we had several incidents, and it was all in sales. They were smaller-ish In other words, the financials were fine because we expensed it. We just expensed something we probably shouldn't have expensed. In 3 different countries, it was always sales. There was always collusion. And how we found out was honestly through a whistleblower of a small event. And then when internal audit got in and dug around, they found, monies being inappropriately spent or something to the like. And I would say the one thing we did do, which was helpful, is quarterly in our quarterly earnings and that it was either legal or internal audit always got 5 minutes, and they would go up there and put up, the poster child of the quarter of who you don't want to be. And there was a very strict, if you do this, you're out, you're terminated, and we will do whatever it takes. And I do think it really brought ethics to the forefront quarterly, and we never missed it. And it was just pervasive around the company, after a while, that just be careful. It didn't mean people didn't do things on occasion, and it was one of those, if you know what's going on, you need to say something. And we did, get people to show up, every now and then in person, and at least through the whistleblower line. So it was, I can understand how you wouldn't see it, because if 2 people are trying to hide it, a lot of those controls don't catch it. We did it on our risk survey too. We had a couple of questions on culture, and to be honest, I can't remember exactly what they are right now. But then it also, we had it everywhere looking for it. It's just, it takes a lot to find it, and you just need to keep pounding away at it, I guess I'd say.
Yeah, I agree. Keep pounding away at it, embedding that into the culture. Yeah.
Letting any gray area is a recipe for disaster. There just can't be gray area when it comes to ethics and numbers and how they're
I made
done.
sure I would go out and talk and rotate through all the sales territories and individually ride with the sales team. And you would be the man. It's surprising what would come out. When they have the CEO in the car, it was pretty shocking. Not the least of which was they were not complying with the hands-free cell phone policy with the CEO in the car. And that's a cultural thing, right?
I think that's also, yeah.
Yeah, they're not going to comply with that. The CEO's in the car, what else are they not going to comply with?
Exactly. I think that's also why you see these rules about taking vacation, getting folks to take vacation, so that there's never this thing where things don't get discovered or whatever. I've heard of this when other companies where smaller companies where people never took vacation, and then something eventually was, there's something happening. But when people have to take vacation and people cover for them, it's just another check and balance. Joseph Lackey, you have a couple comments here in the chat, one about NDAs and one about Dina. Would you like to just kind of go over it and see if there's any?
Yeah, as far as like R&D and technical companies, a lot of organizations, now, I don't know if they would extend that to a board position. I haven't reviewed enough of those scenarios, but obviously for employees, a lot of times there's non-competes and different NDAs. So an employee oftentimes cannot work for another organization while they're serving their primary employer. So that I was just commenting on the fact that would prevent these other potential side deals that either board members or other directors are having, outside of their responsibility to keeping within the guidelines of the company that they're already serving. And additionally, as far as the D&O insurance, as far as I understand it, it's a good idea to make sure that the policy, if you are applying for a board position, make sure that the policy is actually stated and there is one provided. Get a copy of that insurance policy, and then you might even want to have it cross-compared to make sure it is a good policy for the work that you're doing, and also make sure that the time extension will cover you after you leave the position. So you want to be covered within the statute of limitations of your decisions. If you're not covered and something happens, there's a lawsuit or something, and the D&O is no longer active, that will create a problem for you in terms of getting coverage. So obviously those are all things to consider in, selecting your D&O policy. And I guess it's just a comment, but just a little educational piece that I've learned from some of the NACD sessions I've attended. Thanks.
Good point.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Eileen, you had a question.
Oh, thank you, Kim. Pam, thank you for being here. This is really informative. I'm sorry for what you went through, but wow, you've really come out of it grandly. So my question is, it seems to me you can't tell if a potential board member, fits the culture by their resume. So I'm kind of curious, do you ask certain questions? Do you go out to lunch? Do you spend a lot of different, interviews with them? How do you get to the point where you feel that a person, is it their personality? I mean, how do you figure it out if it's going to fit the culture?
That's a really good question. And I don't think I've fully mastered it yet. I think that's going to be lifelong learning, but it's similar to interviewing employees. But I did go through a process with one of my client companies recently, and the recruiter, it was actually for a chief commercial officer, and the recruiter got all of us together. I'm an advisory board member, and the management and their key board members and investor board members, and said, what factors, what are you looking for in this particular person? And then had a whole list of value-based things. It was pretty intensive because it took hours to really hash that out and come to consensus among us about what we actually wanted on non-financial, non-skill based, how many sales have they, what their selling background was. It was all about the values and whether they're going to fit in that culture. And it was fascinating because it made once we got that down on paper, then it made the interviews so much richer in being able to suss out who was going to fit or who wasn't going to fit. So having that pre-work, and I hadn't done that, we're talking about like 4 hours worth of work on together as the team, board and management, sussing out what we wanted. And that I hadn't done that before. So that was one.
And I guess, when you prepare for an interview as a potential board member, so put yourself in our shoes, how do you figure out what the culture of the company is before you go, or is there any way to do that?
Well, that's another good one. That's a tough one. I think you have to talk to other people. Yeah, when I have interviewed for boards, I have asked them a lot of questions. So I was flipping it over and asking some of the similar questions I would ask if they were interviewing. I ask them, and how would you describe the culture? What are your measures of it, and so forth, and what is your sign? What is a sign of integrity in a person, and things like that. And so getting deeper than you served on this board or that, again, skills, you're the best scientist in the universe and have created a whole new wing of science, you're the CEO, so something other than that. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks very much.
Yeah, it's interesting when we look at culture, because in respect with what we're talking about here, you're creating a culture of good ethics, many different facets. And when you think about the board culture, you also want to make sure that you're not just trying to get people that are just going to be agreeable. You need people to be contrarians, that are going to ask hard questions, and that's not going to be seen as, bucking the system or not supporting management. It's just, to me, when I'm on a board and people ask if we go through meetings and no one's asking the hard questions and digging deep, then I wonder, I don't think you're doing your job if you don't. Yeah. So it's a really delicate balance. And I'm just curious what you think of that in terms of the dynamic of the board going forward.
I've been on a VC bet because I've raised venture capital. I've been on, have boards that are dominated by investors. And what you have to avoid is the dog and pony board, where management spends inordinate amounts of time with these beautiful slick slides, and then come in with their 50 slide deck and wow in the board, and the one who has the best slides and the best communication are wow the board members. And I have actually seen board members get really wowed by that, by the superficial nature of the communication versus the actual content. So if you've got a CFO that's a little rough around the edges in presenting, but is presenting you the most important thing you need to hear, I've actually seen boards, ignore that but would be wowed by somebody else who had the slick presentation. And I've seen that so many times. And so I think that's one of the really key things to avoid. One of the boards I'm on is a human cell company, and the CEO just she wants to be able to help the board really help her. So it's let your hair down, and that I haven't seen so often, where the CEO can just say, look, I need help, and just let's roll up our sleeves. But that's what you want to desire. You really want that culture. And I don't, the egos often get in the way. I don't always see that. Yeah,
that definitely. So Amy Bernard Vaughn, why don't you go ahead and give the background on the question that you have here.
Hi, sure. Lovely to be here with you all. As a former Fortune 5 compliance officer at McKesson, and an attorney, and a former CHRO and CAO in financial services and healthcare, I'm very curious about the degree to which we were always working so hard to try to make sure that our data appropriately got to the board so that they could fulfill their governance and fiduciary responsibilities. And there was always a bit of an internal scuffle over the power play of whether usually the general counsel, unless there's been a corporate integrity agreement, usually the general counsel can block the compliance officer from presenting to the board directly, that kind of thing. And I'm just curious, for those of you, I'm on a university board of trustees currently, not on a corporate board yet, but I'm curious to what degree you all believe you're getting the data that you need to know what's going on, to know what's happening, because that can be scary for responsibilities. I was late because I was coming off of a Compliance Week conference on reporting DEIB metrics to the board, which is a new SEC rule, and we're working out what would KPIs be and look like, and how do we advise boards on what they should be asking around human capital metrics. So I'm curious, and that's going to be a whole other set of data. So I'm just curious how do you all feel like you get, or do you feel like it's shielded or cloudy? We used to get like 5 minutes, on the agenda if we were lucky.
Well, and that's what NACD is trying to change, right? Is that it becomes a much more predominant part of the board agenda. Now, you mentioned I served on as an alumni elected trustee of Cornell for 4 years, and was on the Budget and Audit Committee. And we have the chair of the Audit Committee today listening in. Craig, do you want to say anything to answer that question? I think you could answer that question really well, because I thought Cornell was exemplary in the dynamics between PwC and the board and the committee and internal audit. You want to say something? Not putting you on the spot, but
it's a little bit about putting me on the spot, Pam. But I think who you have as the chief financial officer and the internal auditor who's running the overall compliance programs, it's absolutely essential that they have a direct line to the audit committee and the audit committee chair, particularly the internal audit function in a large organization. When I listen to you, Pam, and talk about startups and bringing in lots of new people, not having resources, that's a completely different situation. You're bringing in people from all different cultures and all different organizations and trying to start a new company. There's a lot more risk entailed in all of that versus a nice large organization like Cornell University that has, and other large institutions that presumably have institutional history in place, and making sure that that you're keeping tabs on it. But my personal opinion is the internal audit function and the report direct relationship and having a close relationship with the internal auditor is essential.
Thank you, Craig. And sorry putting you on the spot, but I knew you'd come through.
Well, we don't have any other questions. Are there any other questions before we start winding up with some summary items? Anyone? No? Well, I'm sure that I speak for the entire group here that this has been well worth the time. I mean, it's rare that folks can talk about when something's gone wrong for a variety of reasons. So Pam, the fact that you're willing to come here and share with us what happened and what you've learned. I know I learned a lot about the tie between the culture and how to possibly prevent something in the future from happening. And also just that there are many things that a board can do, you know, to prepare for. I always have this thing that I say that you have peacetime and wartime directors, you know, and you really find out during wartime who those wartime directors are, because not everybody's made up for the wartime. Peacetime's, you know, what we all want on a board. We want everything to cruise along and have that line of growth and so on and so forth. But that's not reality. Things happen. So having this insight from you has been really, really great to help us all prepare for that. So what kind of final thoughts or takeaways would you like to share with the group before we move on with our day?
Yeah, I would like to just reemphasize what you said, Kim, in that because there were a number of questions about how to recruit directors and looking what you're looking for, and peacetime versus wartime. It's has that director gone through something very difficult on a board? Because if you haven't, you don't know how that board member is going to react. And sometimes they panic and sometimes they don't. They're more constructive. And so having those who are unflappable during the bad times can really be helpful. And so that's a thing you can certainly ask. I think that's really important. So I would like to mention that the Society of Corporate Compliance and Ethics, it was a really good resource for us. And then Santa Clara University has the Markula Center for Applied Ethics. And they actually have a little thing you can take for your board, which is an ethical culture assessment for your board. And so it's a great resource that probably most people don't even know about. But it was identified as a resource for me when after this H-bomb. So I found it to be very useful. Yeah. So, but thank you all for attending. Really appreciate it. Got a powerhouse group of people here.